of the world. Yeah.
Shinyi, I want to go back to what you said about traumatized immigrant parents. And
Yeah.
as I was reading your articles, interviews, listening to your podcast, I got a feeling that you had a loving relationship with your mother, especially, but a distant one. And as an immigrant mother, a lot of times, even if I don't want to, I start projecting a lot of that onto myself. And I start to look at my relationship with my daughters. And it was an introspective exercise just reading about you. Can you elaborate a little bit about your relationship with your parents, you calling them traumatized immigrants, and also your relationship specifically with your mom?
Sure. They are very distinct relationships that don't necessarily have a lot of overlap, but yeah, we can talk about that. So, um, my mother, she came to this country in her late 20s to marry my father, who had come first to the United States, and she did not study English as part of her background, and so coming to this country, she didn't have English proficiency or ability to communicate with others. And they initially settled in the American Midwest. And so it was a very isolating, and I would dare to say, a lonely time for my mother. Who then they started their family. So they had my older brother, shortly, maybe a year or two after she had come. And that disrupted some of her own studies and kind of just getting established in this country. And so then she was this new mother in Kirksville, Missouri, where there were like no other Asians and there was nobody to talk to. And motherhood itself is a tremendously lonely time. And, that combined with being an immigrant without the language, I think those two things are kind of like really heavy, heavy karma. So, my father would tell me stories about like meeting randomly like a Chinese speaking person in his workplace, and he would befriend that individual and bring them home so that they could meet and talk to my mother. So that was kind of their existence in the Midwest, first in Kirksville, Missouri, and then later in Decatur, Illinois, where I was born. Eventually, they moved out to Southern California, where I grew up, but also in a very mixed race, working class area without Asian people. And so I think the experience that has really characterized my mother's life, when I think about it, has been one of a kind of profound loneliness and a separation and cultural loss. In terms of not having the resources or the people or the language or the culture available to her to mirror back who she is. So I think for her, um, you know, uh, coming into being a mother was probably very challenging, not having other mothers with young children to relate to in her language, being herself a formidable visual artist who had gone to art school and had a very successful professional career in Taiwan. That loss of identity and needing to bring that back into who she is and to integrate those parts of herself, I would imagine that that was a much longer journey for her than it has been for me, because I have certain privileges that she did not, especially the language piece of things. Um, for my father, my relationship to my father, um, that's a complex relationship, and I just actually came from seeing my parents a couple weeks ago in California, and so a lot of this is kind of rattling around for me as a lot of identity, kind of issues flare up again, right? Um, but my father chose to come to the United States because his situation in Taiwan was kind of tenuous. He didn't feel safe. I don't want to, I think, disclose too many details, but both of my parents were born during World War II, during the Japanese occupation, and lived during the time of the nationalist Chinese government coming into Taiwan and then establishing martial law until
Hmm.
1987. And my parents left in the late 1960s, but they we're really coming of age during this period that is known as the White Terror, which a lot of Westerners may not know about. But It really speaks to this time when the nationalist government really asserted themselves in the Taiwanese government and nationhood. And as a result of it, there were massacres of tens of thousands of people um, associated with something called the 228 event. And people that were killed included doctors and intellectuals and teachers and political activists. There was an island offshore where they would ship people for labor called Green Island. And it was a time for a long period of time where people were disappeared and there was a blacklist. And my father, I think, feared for his safety. Some things happened to him. And so he decided to get out. He decided to come to the United States. And so I think those experiences heavily colored his past and his relationship to Taiwan and how much he loved it, while also feeling, I think, that he had to escape it, that he had to leave it. Very complicated history. And so when I say that they were traumatized or that they have PTSD, I say this with as much compassion and love as I can, because I know that that informed their parenting style or philosophy or lack of one.